Caitlin Carrico, she got Nobel Prize for mRNA vaccine. In one of the most memorable comments, she has thanked, it's traditional to thank family. She has thanked all the people who tried to make her life miserable because that gave her the motivation to succeed. If you do 15 routine experiments and get the expected results, you get a nice chart in a paper. But if you get an anomalous result, you get a discovery. There was a very famous scientist in Harvard called Judah Folkman who said, I have cured cancer in laboratory rats thousands of times. I have yet to do it in a human being. If you do not take food as medicine, you will soon take medicine as food.
Welcome to another episode of Chat Masala. We're thrilled to have with us Dr. Mukund Chorghade, who has 31 years of extensive experience in the field of chemistry, from synthetic organic chemistry to drug discovery and development. He is going to make this field inspiring, and inspirational. So super looking forward. And in addition to his academic career, he's the founder and chief scientific officer of Think Pharma, and has held visiting appointments in some universities you may have heard of: Caltech, Harvard, MIT, Cambridge, Northwestern, Princeton, and the University of Chicago. He has a PhD in organic chemistry from Georgetown. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you so much. I'm greatly delighted, elated, and honored to be here with you.
Let's start with the most pressing question I have on my mind. Do you think there are non-carbon-based life forms out there in the universe?
The answer is going to be a very resounding yes. And this has been the subject of a lot of very recent research. Particularly look at the Nobel Prize winning work of Professor Frances Arnold. She has actually created enzymes which do not contain the carbons, but they contain silicon, germanium, and all that. She is using this to express a lot of new proteins. And there is very widespread speculation that there will indeed be found several life forms in the outer space and outer atmosphere.
Amazing. So can't wait until those are discovered. Sorry, just wanted to throw that googly there. But if we can take a step back, would love to hear more about your intellectual journey. I know we've had some conversations about your early inspirations. Can you share that with our audience here?
Yes, I'll be certainly happy to. So my interest in science began at a very young age. In 1962, we had a border skirmish with China, and the Indian Army and leadership of the political arena also sought the appointment and advice of President John F. Kennedy in the USA, and then, of course, Prime Minister Macmillan in the UK. The result was several arms were shipped into India. Now, my father was a physicist by training. He was an X-ray crystallographer who had done his graduate work with Professor C.V. Raman, the famous Nobel Laureate, and his associate Sir K.S. Krishnan. So I was always taught about the mysteries of science and everything else. But in that time, all these flights were landing in the middle of the night. It was in the midst of our vacation. And my dad requested me to, hey, come along and see the fun. That was the first time I saw these giant transport planes and all land in Kolkata, where my dad was an aerodrome officer. And this continued for some days. And of course, I was introduced to the pilots and all. On one of these trips, I think it was about the fourth or fifth day, the chairman of the US Atomic Energy Commission, Professor Glen Seeborg, had arrived, and he arrived with Norman Borlaug. So it was very fascinating for me to meet so distinguished a scientist, and he was very imposing physically, at 6 feet, several inches tall. 2 years later, then of course the pilots and all that used to say hello to the kid Mukund. One of them gave me a model of an airplane which belonged to Pan Am. But the more important thing was I was given a book which was called Chemistry Creates a New World. And that has been on my bookshelf since 19 1963. And please notice that the foreword for this book was written by Professor Glen Seeborg. Now, that was hugely inspirational for a 9-year-old kid. I started reading about the discovery of new transuranic elements, followed some years down the road, and my father, of course, visited the USA. I set him up an appointment with Professor Glen Seeborg, who was very kind enough to receive us, and you can see that in the picture. This is the Professor Glen T. Seeborg with my parents. On the top is Professor Emilio Segre, who had also played a tremendous role in the Manhattan Project and so on. So I would say my interest in science was kindled at a rather early age. And this somehow continued almost by some divine instinct or whatever. I managed to do well in all my chemistry exams in high school, continuing through college.
Lovely. Sir, if you don't mind, I want to give our audience a little bit of context. I'm recalling my own high school AP chemistry class in which we had to fill out the entire periodic table. And I recall one element, Seeborgium. So this is the same Glen Seeborg, to my understanding. So he's not only a Nobel Prize winner, but he's got an element named after him alongside Newton and Einstein. Is that correct?
This is absolutely correct. And he has been inventor of a medal named after him, which was a transuranic element, and the others are there like Ernest Orlando Lawrence, who has an element Laurentium, and so on and so forth. We now have Meitnerium, and so on and so forth. Now, when Glen Seeborg was still alive, the convention was that you could not name an element even newly discovered after a living person. So they gave him that honor of naming it many years later after his death. But yes, he is the proud holder of a name of an element. And I worked with the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, which gives names and approves names for all metals. And I was in the hall that day when the vote was taken to name this particular element Seeborgium.
Amazing, amazing.
So these are spine-tingling moments in my life, although I'm not an inorganic chemist.
Amazing. So sorry to interrupt. You were talking about your journey through college.
So in college, I managed to do well. Now, there were some interludes, like my family suggested that I go to medical school and become a medical doctor. I did get accepted, but I was underage. I'd flown through high school at an early age. And therefore, I got a scholarship which said that go and get your bachelor's degree and then come back. Well, I never went back. My interest in chemistry continued unabated. I graduated from the University of Pune and then did a 1-year stint with Professor Bal Tilak at the National Chemical Laboratory, but then came to the United States for my PhD, which was at Georgetown University. And then after the usual round of postdocs at basically starting at MIT, University of Virginia, Charlottesville, and then Harvard, I had an industrial career. So my interest, my enthusiasm, my love for chemistry has continued unabated. Now, since I was a trained synthetic organic chemist, the maximum utility for people with that kind of training was, of course, in pharmaceutical industry. But I also worked in doing agrochemicals. We managed to make many molecules, test them against whatever therapeutic or other target you want, and so on and so forth. Since 2006, I have been a serial entrepreneur who has set up Think Pharma. We are trying to discover medicines through traditional Indian medicine. One thing I am very happy and proud to say, remember, my dad had worked with the Nobel Laureate. Then I made it my goal that, hey, I have to also collaborate with some people. And I consider myself singularly fortunate that I've had the pleasure of working with 4 such Nobel laureates. The first was Sir Derek Barton. The second was Professor Jean-Marie Len in Strasbourg. then Professor Robert Grubbs at Caltech, and now I'm doing a sabbatical stint with Sir Richard Roberts at the New England Biolabs.
Amazing.
And each of these scholars has continued to inspire me in chemistry and all that to do well and to always explore something new, not be content with the same old routine.
Sir, if I can go deeper into this, I mean, there are phenomenal scientists around the world, but what do you think differentiates Nobel Prize winners? I know there's some element of luck, but what are some mindsets or approaches that lead to such seminal discoveries and breakthroughs in your specific field? I hope you're enjoying this episode of Chat Masala. Before we move on with this insightful conversation, please be sure to subscribe and follow us so we can continue expanding our minds together.
What I humbly believe is that the Nobel laureates are trained in much similar fashion to ours, but they have a special insight and, more important, a very specific persistence. They are not daunted by any kind of failure. Now, in physics in particular, you have seen that some people can postulate a theory and then work for years towards actually determining whether that prediction that they made by theory is borne out by experiment. And the most memorable examples are the Higgs boson, which was eventually invented. But in chemistry, many times what has happened is people have done the laboratory work, and some people have got, say, a result that is far different from what they expected. Now, it requires a certain intuitive genius, if you will, to say, no, let's not ignore that particular result. This can teach us something that can be incredibly profound. Take a look at all these people that I have talked about. First one was a person called Herbert C. Brown. He was working with a postdoc, and they did some hydrogenation. They were reacting some materials with diborane and all this. They found a very anomalous result. In that, they found that instead of the expected routine reduction, they had got something else. Well, that led to the discovery and exploration of an entirely new continent in boron chemistry, and Herbert C. Brown rightfully got the Nobel Prize for that. Take a look at Robert Grubbs. There was an anomalous reaction that was discovered in industry. It was called as olefin metathesis. People are seeing. Well, these people put their hearts and minds to it, and they conquered this particular area. One, they had the cleverness to identify a particular problem. Then they had the mindset and the intellect to apply their best minds and, of course, hire a lot of the wonderful postdocs and students, and ultimately lead to a tremendous solution of the problem. So Bob Grubbs found out that the olefin metathesis can be made to work with ruthenium and under very ambient temperature and pressure conditions. That led to huge breakthroughs. Lastly, this works even in molecular biology. I mean, take a look when the first mRNA vaccines came. You had a situation where they were stable only at minus 78 degrees. Now you can well imagine that you cannot transport these materials so easily and deliver the vaccine. Then Rich Roberts and all these colleagues in Moderna particularly, they found out a way of using some specific enzymes to raise the stability of it. So now they became stable, first at 0 degrees and then at room temperature, and the whole field has grown since then. You ask me what is about a mindset. So too many people get very discouraged by certain failures. But if you have the right persistence, but above all, if you can design the right experiments, if you can think through what went wrong and treat everything as a teachable moment. Take a look at the most famous Indian scientist at the time, Hargobind Khorana. He decided he's going to synthesize this particular gene, and that led to a 300-page paper in biochemistry. At first, many people actively discouraged him. He said that work is going to be unbelievably boring. He said, but no, the end result is actually very nice. And lastly, I'll direct you to Caitlin Carrico. I talked about not being discouraged. She got this year's Nobel Prize for mRNA vaccine. In one of the most memorable comments, she has thanked, it's traditional to thank family. She has thanked all the people who tried to make her life miserable because that gave her the motivation to succeed.
Amazing. So I feel like there are life lessons here that transcend academia. Number one is if there's something anomalous, it's convenient to have a worldview. And if something doesn't fit into that, oh, it's probably a mistake or whatever, we'll check it again. But what I'm hearing is these Nobel Prize winners look at those mistakes and they want to be proved wrong. Like, okay, the anomaly is an opportunity to expand our current understanding and perhaps formulate more general theories. So that seems to be one takeaway. And the second is just this dogged persistence. And you just have to keep on going despite what perhaps your immediate community, scientific or otherwise, may be saying.
Yes, absolutely. One famous scientist has also said that if you do 15 routine experiments and get the expected results, you get a nice chart in a paper. But if you get an anomalous result, you get a discovery.
Amazing. Would love to hear more, Dr. Chorghade, about the kind of milestone projects that you've been involved with in your careers. What are some of the highlights that you'd like to share to inspire young budding scientists?
Absolutely. So I was always excited about anti-cancer drugs in my postdoc with Professor Sidney Heck. I was involved in a group effort to do the total synthesis of a major anti-cancer drug called as bleomycin. That was useful for lung, intestinal cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma, and so on. I was so happy to play even a small part in that. But remember, doing that, I was doing my work, but I was getting inspiration and excitement and even training, not just from my professor, but I was getting it from my lab colleagues. Now, when my projects evolved in industry, I was very excited to be involved in the discovery of a major herbicide, which was environmentally benign. At Abbott Laboratories, I participated in process development of an anti-epileptic drug called tiagabine, and that gave me such exciting results, one of which was so unexpected that ultimately we were able to make many new molecules. We coined the term process chemistry-driven medicinal chemistry. This sort of continued, but what gave me real excitement was in the year 2006, I met a very big scholar called Ashok Vaidya. He has an MD, PhD from Yale and Columbia. So does his wife, and so does his daughter. But this gentleman headed up the discovery groups in Seeborg Research Center in Mumbai. When that center closed, Ashok Vaidya applied his mind to say, why cannot we use these innovative techniques to launch drugs derived from Indian traditional medicine? And I was so inspired by that, I decided that yes, this field needs the transforming power of chemistry to do the new drug discovery modalities and all this. This gives me a tremendous sense of excitement because then you feel that you have truly helped the people you are reaching out to. I continue on that path and I expect to continue down that path.
Absolutely. No, I was visiting the US and hopped into a Starbucks and was flabbergasted to see turmeric spiced lattes. So I think there's a recognition that a lot of these materials from traditional Indian recipes, medicinal and cooking, have some profound, powerful healing properties. I want to talk a little bit about the drug discovery process. No doubt there are countless chemists working very sincerely. That said, there have been some TV shows and documentaries about, OxyContin and some other drugs that have had unforeseen consequences across society due to addiction and so on. How is the industry balancing drug discovery with some of the unintended consequences that may take years to study? How do you balance the chemistry and the ethics in essence?
See, remember, all these projects started with a very good, firm intention in mind. We as medicinal chemists, we as process chemists, don't start off on a project which we know is going to lead to harm to people. I mean, that's just not going to happen. It will not excite anybody. So all these projects begin with a defined therapeutic goal, or of course, agrochemical, whatever you want to do. So people begin with a project saying, I want to target, say, asthma. So what happens in asthma? I have to inhibit the 5 lipooxygenase enzyme and so on and so forth. People will have defined some biological receptors. Then we chemists make many, many molecules and we test our by assays and all that about how these kind of interactions are going to occur. So nothing ever starts with a sinister view in mind. Okay, let's be very upfront about that. Now you say there are unintended consequences. Why are there unintended consequences? First of all, before we go into human beings, before we do the phase 1 clinical, we have to subject this to animal studies. Okay. Now those animal models are not refined. It is often said that the rat and mouse models are only about 40% as predictive and effective. There was a very famous scientist in Harvard called Judah Folkman who said, I have cured cancer in laboratory rats thousands of times. I have yet to do it in a human being. So sometimes that data is not necessarily transferable. But I want to highlight one thing that, as we go along, the drugs get approved for a designed therapeutic use. Many times, these drugs have been subject to overuse, overdosing, and so on and so forth. Now, that crosses a certain ethical dimension in a way, and there's plenty of blame going around. The chemists and discoverers say, well, this was not we had in mind anyway. Maybe the testing was incomplete, but then where do you draw the line? The most crazy example of this is a drug called as thalidomide. Why was it invented? It was invented with the way to helping particularly pregnant women ease their anxiety and kind of calm down in the birthing process. Now, in the 1960s, maybe the testing wasn't perfect, but the result was that in Europe in particular, there were 10,000 plus babies that were born with severely deformed limbs or no limbs at all. And therefore, it led to a major public relations and other disaster. We as scientists have to be very cognizant when we say that there is going to be overuse and all. This is something, a decision that absolutely has to be made. Now, sometimes there are reverse examples. Remember, the nerve gas, which was used in World War I, essentially as an offensive agent, then later on people said, well, clearly this is not going to work, but those beta-chloroamines have been useful in cancer treatment as well. Now, do you think, what does Mukund Chorghade contribute to this one? I'm responsible for the invention of the so-called chemosynthetic liver. So we have invented a chemical catalyst which can reasonably or with better accuracy predict what are going to be the metabolites of these drugs, how they are going to possibly interact in the human body. And we have got a lot of recognition for that. All is not perfect, but we are taking baby steps in the right direction.
Amazing. So what you're saying is they're always the purest of intentions. Unfortunately, there is some misuse, but at the same time, there are reverse examples as well. There may be developments in the military sphere that have surprising benefits in medicine. Got it. Where do you see the field evolving in the coming years and decades, Doctor? You talked about the synthesis between allopathy and traditional forms of medicine like Ayurveda. People are talking about anti-aging and genetic engineering. What can we see as humanity in the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Yes, absolutely. If I'm bold enough to make a prediction, without any astrological charts or anything like that, One of the criticisms that has been leveled against the pharmaceutical industry is for a long time they have targeted the very common diseases and many times diseases of the rich. Okay, so we have every pharma company imaginable who worked on anti-diabetic drugs, who have worked on anti-cancer drugs. So what was neglected in this field? What was neglected was the rare neglected diseases, tropical diseases and so on. Because when I was a much younger man, the conventional wisdom was that the people in Asia and all that are not going to be able to afford drugs. So we'll never get the profit money from that one. So why even bother to do the research? But now companies are changing. There is a lot more effort on rare and neglected diseases. You are seeing things, newer technologies come to the fore. You are seeing the gene therapy and everything else, not yet fully launched, but this is going to drive this industry forward. It is also going to be driven forward by the transforming power of organic chemistry. We haven't mined all the space that can be possibly mined. There are literally several new molecules that can be tested, and I won't belabor the point by going into all the reasons why they have not been tested, but I see this as a great wave of the future. I also see a huge transformational change in doing what you talked about with turmeric and everything else. This has been written off sometimes in the past as, oh, this is traditional medicine. It even acquired a term complementary or alternative medicine. I see nothing alternative about it. All these molecules have a well-defined chemical moiety in it. That is the exact same thing. The pharmaceutical industry, the first several years, 80% of their output came from natural products. We are going back to the same natural products now. And therefore, now what is the big gulf that will be bridged in the coming years between allopathy and this Indian Ayush system of medicine, Ayurveda, Unani, and Siddha medicines, which are all plant-based. But those practices in those medicines were always in the vernacular languages. So there was no cohesion between what was observed in the clinic and so on. But now we have to bring all this back, at least the top several plants. We have to study the chemistry. We have to study the molecular biology and give certain respectability to it. Now, I'll tell you one story about turmeric, for example. I was listening to a lecture in the Harvard Medical School, and this gentleman had done a mud pack therapy because, in his opinion, many of the men and women, they used to get badly burnt on the beaches or in UV tanning salons because they wanted to have a tan look which was perceived of as being healthy. Now, this gentleman devised a mud bath which contained what? Which contained turmeric. Get a load of this one. And he claimed that it gives a certain radiance to the skin. And then he told me that he adds one natural product. And I said, which one, sir? And I really fell off my chair because he was adding forskolin. Now, fast forward to India. Our men and women have known for a long time that turmeric does have curative powers in a way. When I was a young man, I used to scrape my knees and arms. What was the first thing they would apply is the turmeric paste. Now, let's do the chemistry of it. But that forskolin was invented in Mumbai, a few miles from where I used to live. And then it was transported to Germany and they did the chemistry and all. It is now time that our Indian scientists take a greater role in this particular moiety. Take a look again at turmeric. It is available everywhere. You have it in all kinds of treatments and everything else. I am not advocating that the industry go to a point where, oh, Mukund, take a 50 milligram capsule of turmeric thing and then ingest it. No, why not use it in our cooking and other kind of things? Let me give you also the example of pomegranates. Pomegranate seeds were always given by my grandmother, by my mother, and everybody else on breakfast yogurts and on a dish called as Shrikhand, which everybody is familiar with. Now, the conventional wisdom, the wisdom gained from generations, was that this is a helpful towards warding off diarrhea and dysentery. Now we know that they contain a chemicals called emethine and other alkaloids. Some years ago, Harvard published a paper that if you drink 2 glasses of pomegranate juice per day, it will regress prostate cancer. You remember the word regress. It's going to be a sort of cure, not just as a preventive. And these are the areas which I see growing exponentially in the next few years. Also, now we have the benefit of more computer-assisted work. I'm not just talking of simple computational chemistry. We have this whole incredible thing about artificial intelligence. I'm very happy to say I'm a novice in this field, but I'm on the board at the Illinois Molecule Maker Lab Institute, and these people are combining chemistry through the aegis of Professor Martin Berg. They are combining chemistry, AI, and everything else. I see a tremendous future in this one, and the better we can do, the more people we can obviously help.
That's amazing. I went through a little phase in my 20s where I was very suspicious of Western medicine and allopathy. But what I'm hearing is there seems to be a change, and there's a recognition globally that maybe some of these supplements can be extremely beneficial. In addition to turmeric, what are some other, I'm just really curious, other maybe neem or tulsi? Have you heard of any potential applications of these?
Well, you highlighted the problem very nicely. So yes, there are others, and particularly there are ashwagandha. There is Tinospora cordifolia, which is nothing but guduchi, and so on and so forth. But don't forget the standard staple of Tulsi, which grows in every backyard, which has almost magical, mystical connotations in all the Hindu mythology, if you will, and the culture and everything else. Recently, people published from the University of Chicago a simple fact. They took the Tulsi plant, they isolated a phenol called as isoeugenol and demonstrated that that was going to be effective in COVID treatment. Now think about that one. What will be the impact of this one? They demonstrated very convincingly that these molecules can be indeed very effective. They are coming from a natural product plant which grows everywhere. Now, the first impulse of some people was that, oh my God, are the Americans stealing the intellectual property of India? Well, no. The Tulsi is available in every Indian grocery store from Alaska to anywhere else. And therefore, I always believe that our wisdom of the Rishis should be definitely harnessed in this one. They didn't know, the Rishis did not know organic chemistry, but good heavens, they made very keen observations. They used the Dhanvantari treatment almost to treat patients and alleviated pain and suffering and all that. Let me give you a different example, if you will, and this came from my academic mentor, who pointed out that the government of South Africa, those days they had the same CSIR that we have in India. They had done a lot of work and found out that when the locals were tired, hungry, famished, far from home, they would chew on these glabrous roots and other things of a plant called as Hoodia carinae. They would have an instant feeling of satiety. So they would ease their hunger pangs, at least until the time they reached home. Now, Pfizer was very interested in this particular project because they thought this will be a very good treatment for obesity, right? Mm-hmm. And they did a lot of work on it. They separated the sugars from the plant. They separated the steroid glycones. There was one major drawback, and that was this plant only grows 6 inches every 12 years. Then that is not environmentally sustainable. But then, with the help of sophisticated computational chemistry, they wrote some things and they found out, they analyzed a lot of plants and a lot of natural products across many areas. They found again that a plant called as Caralluma fimbriata, which grows in Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, that grows 12 inches a month, but that is used by the locals for exactly the same purpose. So it doesn't matter whether you are an African living in Africa, whether you are an Indian living over here, you are all going to be developing some of this chemistry together. And I think our people should now write grants and study all this business, because there is so much to be gained from the traditional knowledge. And particularly take a look at Tinospora cordifolia. It is very good for lowering your blood sugar. It is known for that one. But again, it has to be combined with good personal habits. You're not going to believe this, but take a look at what my grandmother used to always tell me. In all our Indian meals, they used to have the Karela, bitter gourd. Why do you think they had it? Because it is known to lower your blood sugar. So it was always touted as it is touted 4,000 years ago that you are going to be curing yourself of madhumeha, as they called it. Now the reaction of the average person, although I have eaten this sabji, so now I am free to eat 6 more gulab jamuns because now I had my preventive.
That's my philosophy.
So everything has to be coupled with something very nice. In one of my lectures, by the way, I used a phrase: if you do not take food as medicine, you will soon take medicine as food.
Ooh, that's
and
good.
That caught on with a lot of traction. But everything has to be done: healthy living, healthy eating, and everything else.
I love that. One last question, and then we have some rapid fires as well. I am extremely curious about your leap from academia. I mean, you're still an academic, but to entrepreneurship. And that's not a leap you see very often. They seem to be very different spheres altogether. Can you talk a little bit about that? How you wear these two very distinct hats of chemist and startup founder or business person?
Yeah, absolutely. So before, I would just want to allay one fear. I became an entrepreneur for a somewhat crazy reason. In all the waves of restructuring and mergers and acquisitions in industry, I was privileged to get the Scientist of the Year award in 3 separate companies. It did not save my job in any one. So at that point, I decided that I have so many ideas, I'm going to develop them and I'm going to become an entrepreneur. And the big advantages of being an entrepreneur are: one, nobody can right size you, downsize you, fire you. Then the commute from your bedroom to your office is quite small. Don't get stuck in traffic. And the biggest advantage somebody pointed out is if you ever call in sick to the office, you are lying. Now, what did I do? I have always remained an academic because I love to teach and I love to get inspiration from not just faculty, but students. They teach you so much. And therefore, we devised our company routes where we actually use the assistance of some very brilliant students and their thesis that came out of it into progressing a lot of the industrial objectives. Now, this is not that common a path, but there are some scholars, particularly in the United States, who have made that huge transition. I mean, these are professors and all that who have launched companies, spun off companies based on their technology. But as every VC will tell you, or a venture capitalist, that it's not a good idea for a professor to be CEO of a company because it's a different job. So we always seek those kind of collaborations. It is useful, and what entrepreneurship has taught me is that I cannot do everything alone. I can bring certain chemistry ideas, but I need the help of the finance people, the legal people, and all these business development also comes very big into the picture. So we really get the experience of working in a multidisciplinary team. I say this partly in jest, but sometimes people have asked me, Dr. Chorghade, how come you have a foot in both doors, in industry and academia? And my response usually is, come to think about it, if I'm standing in an academic group and I say something maybe that's not correct, I have a ready-made escape hatch by saying, well, I don't know, I'm from industry. And the same thing works in reverse as well. So I'm a big believer in catalyzing the cause of entrepreneurship. I'm a big believer in helping students reach their maximum potential. See, there is no age under which you cannot try entrepreneurship. There is no age over which you cannot try entrepreneurship. So all this is by dint of going to be a very good science and all. I work with American Chemical Society and small groups like Small Chemical Businesses Division, where we actually provide this kind of training.
Amazing. Wow. Very inspiring, sir. Dr. Chorghade, the team would love to hear more about your perspective on Indian chemical research. There's the Ministry of Ayush that is looking at the benefits of traditional Ayurvedic materials. Do you see Indian primary fundamental research in chemistry and other sciences taking off in the coming decades?
We have been trying to work with the Ayush Ministry. Until at least 10 years ago, this group was not encouraging that much research because of the perception that any time anybody not living in India would get involved, it will lead to a loss of intellectual property to India. I have never agreed with that particular situation, so we were not all that successful. In the more recent past, people are showing greater interest in developing some of these drugs, but still the approval cycle leaves a lot to be desired. I think we have to get over our paranoia of theft of intellectual property, because the people who are going to get better are going to span the globe. No ifs, ands, and buts about that one. I mean, the rare, neglected diseases, all that can be made very effective. I'm involved in some efforts, and we have written some grant applications. So I'm certainly hoping for a very positive outcome to the situation.
Perfect. So now some quick questions. What is your favorite element or compound?
As an organic chemist, it should be carbon.
That's a slam dunk. It's carbon.
Because all our science is based on that one. Organic chemistry is the chemistry of carbon compounds. So I won't be here without that. I will say the close second will be silicon.
Silicon, yeah.
But I have a tremendous sentimental fondness for the transuranic elements, from uranium, neptunium, plutonium, seaborgium, and all that.
Naturally. Fantastic. What is your favorite chemical reaction in cooking? I think this comes from Chandra.
My favorite chemical reaction in cooking will probably be the ester hydrolysis, because it is that is going to give us some fun there. And of course, the reverse ester formation. Take a look at basmati rice. When you cook it, it has a very wonderful fragrance. And that is due to a banana-like compound called as isoamyl acetate. That is what results in different flavors. Of course, all the turmeric and other things that you add, all the spices, all of them have to be liberated by this hydrolysis reaction, ester hydrolysis.
Amazing.
That's what gives us the flavor, the fragrance, and everything else.
Amazing. Lovely. Your favorite chemistry joke?
I'm reminded of a famous incident when a leader approached, when a comical genius approached the President of the United States. He says, "Can I tell you the latest joke?" And the President says, "Well, too late. I've already appointed most of them to my cabinet." But anyway, on a more saner note, yes, there are a lot of fantastic stories about chemistry, in chemistry. My favorite always remains the story of the Nobel Laureate, Professor Robert Millikan, who was asked, he received the Nobel Prize and he was resting at his home in a late October evening. He got a call from a neighbor or somebody who wanted him to come examine his sick daughter. Mrs. Millikan, who picked up the phone, uttered the most memorable line. And she said, "Oh, you must have my husband confused for the MD next door. My husband is not the kind of doctor that does anybody any good." And I've treasured that, whenever I get swollen-headed and so on, I tend to remember things like that. But there are many. I usually give a talk on the wit and humor of chemistry, into which some of these fun stories have been enshrined for posterity.
No, of course, no. But your impact is undeniable. What's one value you hold dear?
Research integrity. I mean, right now the world is full of all kinds of problems in data analysis. You have to be true to yourself. If your experiment does not match the theory goes out of the window. You do not manipulate data to fit your pre-existing ideas. Research integrity is a tremendously important thing. And some people who have run afoul of that, the results have not been very good.
Got it. Yeah. I remember hearing statistics don't lie, statisticians do. Math joke for you.
A similar thing is told about teachers. There was a line in the movie Karate Kid where he said, there are no bad students, there are only bad teachers.
That's good advice for us. Lovely. Excellence is blank. How do you complete that sentence?
Striving to reach your maximum potential and aiming to be the best you can.
Well put. Absolutely.
My professor in Pune University used to say, even if you become a street sweeper, you have to say that I will become the best street sweeper in the whole of Pune city. And that's a good morale booster to have, that you aim to be the best.
Thank you. A couple more. What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
The one thing that I really wished was the better interaction between medicine and all these molecules we are making. What should be the ultimate goal of this kind of work? I wish I knew that there has to be better coordination between our medical professionals, our synthetic chemists, and all that, all of which have to work for the common good.
But in terms of maybe an insight or a principle, what is something you've developed over the years that you wish you had discovered when you were starting off in life?
I wish I would have discovered, certainly a new reaction to achieve some of these transformations would have been wonderful. I am the discoverer of the so-called chemosynthetic liver, which teaches me what kind of pharmaceuticals I should ingest, how different things interact. This knowledge was not known at the time, but I wish we had it. Because again, too many people mix and match things in different proportions, and some of it is arising out of a certain ignorance.
And the last one, what's one change you wish to see in the world in 10 years, let's say 2035?
I would like to see much greater dedication and emphasis on science itself. And it should not be just for very short-term gains. I mean, this is a change that has to come about in politicians, administrators, and all that. Too often, society looks for a very, very short-term gain. Even the students, I'm still surprised at the number of people who walk up to me and say, oh, I'm interested in studying this. Is there any scope for that? I never know how to answer that. I mean, how do you tell? If I am a student of chemistry, will it be more useful 5 years from then? No. I feel what should change is people's attitude that what they are studying, the education they are getting, is so that they acquire a better sense of reasoning, rationale, and wisdom. And that will stand them in good stead, their problem-solving approach, and all that anywhere else they might go. There's a famous quote again by my hero, Professor Robert B. Woodward. He was asked to testify in the US Congress, and they said, Professor Woodward, you chemists are making perfumes and cosmetics and all that. Why do we spend money on you when we can invent a new B-1 bomber? And Senator asked Professor Woodward, in what way does your work contribute to the defense of America? And the reply was memorable. It said, "Sir, it makes this country a hell of a lot more worth defending." Now, that is pure genius, but that is the way society should think, that we have to invest better resources in quality science, better education, and so on.
Dr. Chorghade, thank you for all the insights. It was a fascinating conversation, and I really hope that we can contribute to this world you imagine. Thank you again.